Back in 2014, my family and I moved out of Manhattan and up near this little place called Batavia, which is about halfway between Rochester and Buffalo. I'm not going to bore you with all the details of the move, just the one most relevant to the story, and that's how the worst part about moving was losing my bar. So I went to the same place to watch them Yankees for over 8 years, so not being able to stop by whenever I wanted felt like losing a limb. I could drive into the city, maybe take the train if I wanted to visit and have a few beers, but what I really needed to do was find a new booze trap for me to watch sports at, and one that was within walking distance. I ended up having to settle on cycling distance instead, which ended up me riding home drunk more than a few times, but in the end, I found this little place called Johnny's Bar that I could ride out to, with all the same local spot feels my old bar had, just with much cheaper beer. And who needs familiar faces when you got 3 bottles of Bud? Now anyways, I start heading over to this place on game nights just to check it out. The first couple of times were kind of awkward. The people in Johnny's weren't rude, just a little insular, I guess. So it took a few visits for them to really warm up to me. I think Johnny saw the same 6 faces night in and night out for the better part of 2 decades, and one of these faces was at the end of the bar there almost every single time I visited. I didn't really notice just how frequently this guy was there until one Wednesday afternoon when I took a half day at work after a fight with the old ball and chain there. It wasn't anything too vicious, and we kissed and made up by bedtime, but after slamming the phone down on her at work, I took that half day, then rode my bike over to Johnny's to get a beer. And there he was, propping up at the end of the bar, the only other guy in the place. And he's skinny as a rake, balding a little on top with gin blossoms all over his nose and cheeks, and all he's doing is sitting there, a glass of liquor in front of him, watching the ash of his butt slowly burn down. And I didn't say anything to him at first, just said hi to the bartender and ordered a beer, and then seeing as it's the great unifier, got to talking about how the wife was giving me grief back at home. And then while I'm doing that, I start trying to get our quiet, skinny friend into the conversation. I guess I'm gregarious like that, not wanting to make anyone feel left out, but almost the second after I turn to the guy to basically be like, "Women, am I right, buddy?" The bartender very subtly raises a hand and shakes his head, as if to say, "Don't bother." I didn't want to offend the guy or anything, so I offered up a little apology to the bartender, just by way of politeness, and then carried on the conversation with him alone. At one point, the bartender goes over to the skinny guy, pours him another liquor, and then, a second after turning his back, the skinny guy downs the drink and then just says, "Another one," in a way that was so flat it kind of came off as rude. I figured Skinny and the bartender must have known each other pretty goddamn well if he'd take that kind of talk without comment. And that, or something really crappy had just happened to this guy, which was why I'd been told to leave him alone. The bartender then walks back over to him, but instead of pouring him another drink, he puts the whole bottle in front of him and says that he'll just add whatever he drinks to his tab. The Skinny returns a nod and thanks, and then over the half hour or so, he finishes the whole bottle, then almost falls off of his stool when it came time to leave. He's only just about made it out the door before he sort of steadied himself and took a deep breath and started off down the grass verge towards wherever he lived at. I waited until the guy was 100% out of listening range, and then I asked the bartender a question of about as diplomatic a fashion as possible, and that question being, what the hell is that guy's problem? The bartender sighed and then just stared off at nothing for a second, like he was weighing up whether or not to tell me. But I think in reality it was more like he was wondering how much he should tell me. And I guess he settled on this. The skinny drunk at the end of the bar, whose name I don't really want to give away, used to be an undercover cop. As soon as the bartender said that, I thought to myself, well, that explains that. I mean, the guy had probably been in some pretty hairy situations, right? We've all seen the movies. Probably had to do a few bumps of blow with a gun in his face or something, terrified his targets, or going to find the wire strapped to his ballsack. But no, this guy wasn't that kind of undercover. He never dressed up or worked on his character like some kind of crazy method actor. He did all of his undercover work from the comfort of some air-conditioned office over in Albany. He didn't physically infiltrate any of the groups that he'd helped bring down. Instead, he did it online. I kind of went from thinking, well, that explains the hardcore day drinking, to how does this guy have advanced PTSD from sending a few emails? But that right there, ladies and gentlemen, demonstrates the sheer vastness of my own ignorance. Because our former undercover cop wasn't busting dorm room pot dealers at NYU or Columbia. No. His job was to infiltrate online pedo rings by posing as someone who shared their disgusting inclinations. From what the bartender said, and to be fair, I've heard this a few places too, undercovers are only supposed to be on the front line for a limited amount of time, what with it being such a high-stress position. Every couple of months you swap your team out for a fresh one and let the spent one rest up and decompress so they're ready to do it all over again. But then, when it came to all the online creepy stuff, things worked slightly different. In regular undercover work, you can't overuse your assets. You can't have one guy who was some meth-slinging biker 5 minutes ago pop up as some mafia associate in the same city just a few weeks later. A lot of the time, when an undercover operation finishes up, you can't use the same people again, especially once criminals start figuring out that there was a rat that they should have been smelling. Only with the online stuff, if your undercover had to burn a profile, they can make up another one in a matter of minutes. Definitely not a cop 69 became swear I'm not 50420, and then we're back on the job cracking into all those evil websites and bringing them down. They still arrested their guys every so often, but it wasn't like they needed to constantly cycle officers around to maintain their covers. And on top of that skinny barfly there was relentless. I don't know if he had some kind of savior complex or if he just knew how good at his job he was, but time and time again, Skinny refuses to go on leave or take any kind of break. He goes back into the meat grinder over and over, boom, 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 uncovering these freaks left and right through gaining their trust, maybe even their friendship, and then getting them to share any material that they had stashed away. Getting them to admit that they were pedos wasn't enough either. You can't just arrest and throw someone in jail just because they said something gross, or at least things don't work that way as far as I know. To get an arrest and a conviction, Skinny had to convince these guys to send them whatever child exploitation pictures they had, and he had to actually look at all this stuff too to make sure it was legitimate, and then another bunch of cops went about tracking down both the victims and the perps. And so, that was Skinny's job, seeing those pictures and talking to those guys, and he did it for years, taking only the odd piece of vacation time here and there so he didn't completely burn himself out. And I guess he was obsessed, but then who wouldn't be? You're taking these scumbags out. But there's still just so many more of them, and every day you take off is one that they're free to carry on doing all their evilness. And I'm not saying I know exactly what this guy was thinking, but that's just my best guess at why he worked so relentlessly. And then one day, I guess things just got the better of old Skinny there, and he turns in his badge and just vanishes off the face of the earth. It wasn't actually Skinny who told the bartender all that stuff about him either. Apparently he just showed up one day, ordered himself a drink, and then kept on knocking them back until the cows came home. Next day he shows up, does the same thing all over again. And then aside from the odd vacation that he gave his liver, that guy was in there almost every day in and day out, doing his respectable impression of Nicolas Cage in that Leaving Las Vegas movie. You know the one, where the guy drinks himself half to death before someone pulls him out of it. Now anyway, several months go by, and then some stranger comes into Johnny's bar with a picture of Skinny, asking if anyone's seen him. Skinny wasn't there at the time, and everyone was all tight-lipped and first wondering who this guy was, and what does he want with him. The stranger then pulls out a police badge, but instead of appealing to authority, the guy appeals to the patron's sense of common decency. He explains that Skinny was an ex-coworker of his at the state police, that he just disappeared after quitting on them, and that he and his old buddies had been trying to track him down for the better part of 6 months. He explains how he thought that Skinny's drinking was out of control, how they'd been worried he'd driven his car off the Five Arches Bridge or something, and how they just wanted to check in on him to see how he was doing. I think the goal was to get Skinny on the wagon, but by the evidence of my own 2 eyes, after seeing him nearly faceplant after climbing off that bar stool, I can safely say that their efforts were in vain. The bartender then told me that that's all Skinny ever seemed to do. Stop by, talk to no one, get drunk, and then leave. And he did it, because all he wanted in the world was to forget about the things that he'd seen, and the things that he'd said, trying to land those child predator scumbags in jail, where they belonged.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all this support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
My recollection of the past could be more precise. Still, as far as I can remember, I believe I was only 4 years old when my mother divorced my biological father and subsequently remarried, ultimately securing my custody. There was something about my stepdad's family that I never liked, and while growing up, I started to avoid them more and more. Although I do not wish to insinuate that my stepfather or his entire family was deplorable, a few individuals within that group made me feel highly uncomfortable, prompting me to distance myself from them as much as possible. I was 11 years old when my step-uncle, whom we'll call Jeff, suddenly started coming to our house more frequently to watch NFL games with my stepdad. They would sit on the couch, drink beer, and cheer for their favorite teams. However, something about Jeff's behavior made me uneasy as time passed. One evening, when my stepdad was passed out on the couch after too much drink, I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water when Jeff stood near the staircase. His eyes lingered on my body in a way that made my skin crawl, and his smile was unsettling. As he started walking towards me, I felt a knot form in my stomach. I was so scared that I ran back to my room and locked the door behind me, hoping he wouldn't follow. After that, I would see him more than usual, dropping at our house unannounced and flirting with my mom while eyeing me. She didn't pay much attention and would laugh at his weird remark about her body. Eventually, his comments shifted to me as he would say stuff like my beauty takes after her, and while my mom thought he was complimenting her, it was only unpleasant to my ears. I started to lock myself in my room upon his displeasing presence, hoping he would stop coming. A month later, when I returned from school one day, I was greeted by the sight of him sitting on the living room couch, engrossed in yet another NFL game. As my eyes darted around the house, my heart pounding in my chest, I realized no one else was present. The intensity of his presence made me feel extremely anxious and scared. Trying to avoid his gaze, I hurriedly tried to walk to my room, only to be startled when he asked if I wanted to watch football with him. I don't watch TV. I dashed to my room after saying that, but I could feel his gaze pierced on my back before I disappeared into my room and locked it after me. I received a phone call from my mother, notifying me that they wouldn't be coming home tonight and that my Uncle Jeff would be watching over me. Despite my attempts to persuade her that I would be fine alone, she scolded me before hanging up the phone. Sitting in my room, I sighed deeply, wondering how long I could go without food or water. At approximately 10 o'clock, I could no longer endure hunger and thirst. Consequently, I ventured out of my room in search of a quick snack, and as I looked around, he was nowhere in sight, leading me to believe that he had retired to the guest room for the night. As I began to take out some food from the refrigerator, I was unexpectedly startled by the sensation of someone firmly grasping my waist. I jumped at the sudden unwanted touch, only to find Jeff standing there with a nasty grin. By the looks of it, He seemed pretty drunk, and as I tried to get out of the kitchen, he grabbed my hand and pulled me closer, making my body tremble with fear. His grip only got tighter as he touched me inappropriately. While I struggled to escape, I started to cry and begged him to let me go, but the evil smile on his face only grew more prominent. When he didn't let me go, I bit him with my entire strength, summoning to my teeth, which made him angrier. And as he let me go, a slap followed to my cheek, making me fall to a distance. But before he could do anything else, I sprinted to my room and locked it after me. I then started bawling as I dialed Mom's number. She answered after the 5th ring, and as I started telling her everything with my sniffles, what she said in reply filled me with hatred for her. My cries grew louder as I called my biological dad, who instantly picked up my call and began worrying as he heard me bawling. I told him everything, and he disconnected the call after saying he would be here soon to pick me up. About half an hour later, I heard the sounds of someone getting beaten through my room and prayed it not to be my dad getting beaten up. A few minutes later, when he called me, I immediately unlocked the door and rushed to his arms while crying my eyes out. I saw Jeff groaning on the floor from the corner of my eyes as I followed my father outside. I told him I wanted to live with him, and he promised to challenge my custody in court. The next day, 2 officers arrived at my dad's house instead of my mom, informing us that she had filed a report that he kidnapped me after assaulting Jeff. The officers asked me to come with them, but I refused and told them everything that had transpired the night before as I showed them the bruises on my cheek. I also told them what Mom said when I called her crying for help. "What's done is done. I'm sure it must be because of something you did. So stay inside your room till we get back tomorrow." My father filed a counter case against them upon my testimony, making my mom's claims false since she was not at the scene. While my mom did say she said what she did to me for my safety since there were no means for them to return immediately, her claims were still denied, and my dad ended up winning my custody. A restriction order for Jeff was issued along with the trials of his crime, and as the investigation began on him, it turned out it was not just me who became a victim of him. He was eventually sent to jail and sentenced to 12 years in prison for all his convictions. I despise football games now since they remind me of those unpleasant memories, and my dad makes sure never to watch them in front of me. My mom still tries to meet me, but I cannot let go of my hate for her, and I have no idea when I can forgive her, for the words she said that night continue to linger in my mind whenever I think of her.
No one knew where it came from. We all went to sleep the night before, and it was there the next morning. Not even the owners of the house on both sides had a clue how it got there. Neither homeowner ever heard as much as the hiss of air brakes. During the whole of that night, the only real indication of how it arrived was the trailer was sitting upon. I was still relatively young at the time, around 13, but the subject was a hot topic around the neighborhood, and every person I spoke to, whether a kid or an adult, was eager to talk about it. Our neighborhood was somewhere new and off by itself, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for folks to dump things out there. Dogs and cats were the most common, but 1 or 2 cars would turn up every year. A house, though, no one ever seen that or expected it. The days passed, but no information could be gotten from anywhere. Soon, it began to take on a spooky and haunted reputation, along with its phantom like a rival in the dark of the night. It did look a little familiar to that house from Psycho. The stories first reached me while I was talking to a friend's younger brother. Among the grade school kids, the house was becoming a very real symbol of fear, although it was just an old empty house to me. This fear didn't prevent some of the more adventurous of them just entering and exploring it. I witnessed a particularly funny episode just by chance. While loafing aimlessly around the streets, I was passing by in time to see a preteen boy running from the house in terror, claiming that something had grabbed him. Whether his imagination had gotten the best of him or an older kid was having a bit of fun, the horror put upon this abandoned house had fully taken root in the neighborhood. While this was going on, a real boogeyman had been forgotten about. I'll not put his actual name here, not because of privacy, but that of the victims. We'll call him Rudy. Rudy had grown up in the neighborhood, and until he was arrested, was well liked by a lot of the parents, had voiced their fears early on because of his habit of hanging around younger boys. When he was released from jail, he was allowed to move in with his folks. Anyone who wasn't aware of his proclivities beforehand knew now every parent in the neighborhood watched him closely. But when the ghost house popped up, people's focus is shifted. A few of us teenagers were riding our bikes around the neighborhood. The father of a boy we'll call Bill was looking for a son. I overheard him speaking to a young kid close by, asking if he had seen him. Nonchalantly, the boy said that he had seen Bill going into that ghost house with Rudy just a few minutes prior. And this got my full attention. The shock of the father's face is still crystal clear in my mind. I turned around and watched the father run full speed into the house. Most of us there stood transfixed as we saw Bill's dad disappear inside. Things were quiet for about the first 30 seconds. Then, all of a sudden, a loud ruckus broke out, followed by Rudy flying out of the doorway and onto the ground below. Billy's dad was close behind. He leapt onto Rudy, throwing fists as he landed. Bill came out a few seconds later crying for his dad to stop. His dad ignored him, standing up and kicking Rudy to the ground over and over. Rudy eventually got to his feet and ran for home. Billy and his dad were right behind him. I continued to watch until they disappeared from my sight. Billy and Rudy would both claim later on that nothing had happened between them. Either way, Billy's dad had the support of most of the community, and Rudy declined to press charges on him. Rudy would eventually move away and out of the minds of most of us, until he was arrested 3 years later for abducting and killing 2 boys near his new home. Only then did we realize how lucky Bill had been. That night, as I'd fallen asleep, I remember wondering what was going to happen to Rudy and Bill's dad. When I woke up, things were normal for a summer morning. Around 9, I was making a bowl of cereal when I got a phone call. It was a friend of mine, and he was short of breath and excited. The ghost house. It's gone, man. I hung up and hopped on my bike. When I arrived at the end of the streets, I looked down and saw the empty lot as it used to be. I rode down to it, and a small group were gathering talking to the neighbors. It was much the same as the morning when it appeared. They hadn't heard or seen anything strange. It seemed to leave just as silently as it had arrived. To this day, I haven't met a soul who knows anything about that house. Sometimes I think I dreamt the whole thing up. But then I speak to an old friend from the neighborhood, and my memories are confirmed. Of course, I don't believe it was haunted or anything like that, but I know for sure that something was wrong about it. And I pray that I never see it again.
This happened about a year ago. There were so many terrible factors working against me that night. I'm astounded I got away unscathed, at least physically. This all begins when I'm in my friend's apartment who lives in a really rough part of town, and a series of poor decisions. That night, I decided to get belligerently drunk and take a few pills of God knows what I know, Safe to say, after a solid night of partying around 4 a.m., I was not in the right state of mind. My drug-addled brain decided that instead of staying at either my friend's apartment like I normally would, I wanted to Uber back to my own apartment. My friend's apartment had 2 separate entrances and exits to the building, one in the back unlit parking lot of the building and one facing the street. They had 2 sets of keys for each door, and I only had keys to the one in the back of the apartment. Since my Uber would obviously arrive at the streets and the door in the front of the building locks itself behind you, I exited this way when the driver was soon to arrive. Looking back, standing outside that apartment, I realized I looked like the easiest target on the planet. I'm a small petite female in my early 20s, and I can hardly stay upright. I'm using a street lamp to prop myself up and not doing a good job at either. The light was basically a beacon for any nearby predator saying, "Come get me." I'm not paying attention to my surroundings at all in this state, despite the fact that there are literally a bullet hole in the front door I just came out of. Not good. I remember checking to see what Kara was getting picked up and was only able to pick out the fact that it was a black sedan. Soon, after stepping outside, a black sedan pulls up to the curb and starts rolling down the windows. So I stepped forward. Before this man even spoke, I could feel something was wrong. He had an expression like he was tearing me apart with just his eyes. After seeing that look, it gave me a new meaning to the word predator to describe a criminal, because I then knew what it felt like to be prey. He basically barks at me, "I'm your Uber driver." And this was the second red flag that somehow made its way through my brain. Normally, Uber drivers just roll down the window and say your name or any version of that, but always include your name. I think I just stared at him for a second, my brain slowly piecing together the situation I was potentially in, and I asked him, "What's my name?" He immediately is enraged and starts screaming about how he doesn't have a frickin' time for this and just get in the effing car, etc., etc. I don't think I've ever been sobered up so fast in my life. I'm completely panicking. Obviously, this wasn't my Uber. Quickly checking the license plate, I immediately see it's not a match. Meanwhile, this guy is still screaming at me, and I have absolutely no idea what to do. If I bolt in either direction, this guy could easily outrun me or even have a weapon. I'm also pretty sure at this point that if he's trying to nab a random girl off the street, he must have a weapon of some sort. I can't run back into the apartment door right behind me since it locks behind you, and I don't have the key, nor the time to unlock it. Running towards the back door would do nothing as well, and as he's idling right by the mouth of the driveway towards the back parking lot, and again, I would have to take time to find the right keys and get in. If I screamed, I'm not exactly in the type of neighborhood where someone would try to be a vigilante, and I can still hear the music radiating from my friend's third-floor apartment. I knew they wouldn't hear me. It's also 4 a.m., and absolutely no one is around. People talk a lot on the sub how they either sprint into action or freeze, but I felt incapable of doing either. It was the absolute worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. Everything in me wanted to run, but I felt that if I did, it would be the end of me. But if I kept standing there, staring in shock at the screaming man, the result will be the same. From when he started screaming at me to this point, I'm guessing only 20 seconds had passed. Just as he's looking like he's getting ready to get out of the car, another black sedan pulls up right behind him, checking the license plate as quickly as I can. I realize it's my actual Uber, and I make a full sprint of the car. Really only like 6 steps, and throw myself in screaming at my real Uber driver, "What's my name?" The poor dude looks terrified, but responds with my name quickly, to which I reply, "Get me out of here. That man's trying to kidnap me." If I was in his Uber driver's position, I think I would be too shocked to react as quickly as he did. But my dude flew out of there, offered to call the cops for me, which I declined and now regret, and then walked me to the front door of my apartment, ensuring I got in safely. Truly an incredible human being. You can rest easy knowing he got the fastest tip my college student bank account would allow for, although He deserved much, much